Thank you for tuning in to watch or to listen to this message today. Wherever you are, at home, in your car, on your computer, on your phone, we're just excited that you're spending time with us. We are on a mission here at CRB to lead people to know and love Jesus. And so if you call this place your home, I encourage you to visit our Give page on our website, where you can find a few easy ways to faithfully support God's work here at the church, financially, through online giving. At CRB, we believe that love will save the world, and the best place to do that is in the local church. So if you live in San Diego or if you're visiting the area, we just want to invite you to come join us on a weekend, come hang out with us, and be a part of the family here. Enjoy the message.
Well, good morning. Happy July 4th weekend. I'm so excited to kick this new series off together because whether you're a Christian or whether you're not a Christian, whether you've told somebody recently, well, I'm spiritual but not religious, which is a common refrain in our world, there's just these questions that hang over all of humanity. There's these questions that ever since the foundations of time, ever since the foundations of any civilization, these big questions that we still wrestle with in an iPhone and Google world of how in the world did we all end up here in this world? How in the world is all this possible? And I know I'm a pastor, but I think we ask that question far too infrequently. I think we should ask that more. Just the reality that we're on this ball of dirt that's being flung around a ball of heat. And if we were a little bit in, we'd all burn up. If we were a little bit out, apparently we'd all freeze to death. And it's also fascinating, isn't it? And the fact that we don't talk about it more is unbelievable to me, because this thing called life, this blessing, this gift called life is just filled with so much wonder and so much awe, so much beauty. And oftentimes we think of life in the modern world, people think of life as a curse, man, just trying to get through the day. And yet when we open our eyes and we look around, the fact that we have optical nerves to see, the fact that we can process, the fact that we have capacities and faculties to produce thought and speech and fall in love and have hope in our heart, it's all just so unbelievable. And there's these moments, whether you're a Christian or whether you're not a Christian, where we just sort of step back and take it all in and just think, it's just unbelievable. My wife's 9 months pregnant. We just have these moments where we're watching this, like elbow grate against the side of the womb. We're like, man, this is just unbelievable. It might be moments when you go on vacation. It might be moments when you stare at the sunset. It might be moments when you get away from your phone long enough, and the thought just sort of hits you. It's just so unbelievable that all of this is taking place. And that ancient question of how did all this come into be, and how we answer that question often shapes what we think we're supposed to do while we're here in this world. And so we're going to explore those questions together over the next 7 weeks. And I certainly know that in the modern world, in the post-scientific world that we live in the 21st century, there's categories, there's explanations for how all this came into existence. There's a category of thought called creationism. And this is going to be a really brief oversimplification of these categories this morning. But there's a category called creationism that says the book of Genesis chapter 1 in particular, is a historical document. It's a historical account of God creating the world in 6 literal days. That's a category of thought for how all this came into existence. There's another category of thought that's the sort of default position of the intellectual education academy world in a post-Darwin, post-scientific world that says evolution is how all this sort of came into existence. And I certainly understand these are politically charged topics. In the last 100 years in American civilization, these have been argued at the highest levels of court. The Scopes trial, if you remember that from school. These are politically charged topics where they pit often faith against science. And evolution is one explanation that says essentially the Earth's not a few thousand years old. The Earth is billions of years old. The world wasn't made by God. The world's actually making itself. And people take passionate stances on these particular issues. There's another category of thought that's, and again, these are oversimplifications, not just creationism, not just evolution, but intellectual design that says, well, there is a God who's sort of the engine of it all. There is a God that all of life is bursting forth from, but perhaps it's not 6 literal days. Perhaps he used some evolutionary methods to create the world. Those are often answers to the questions of how all this came into existence. And I'm certainly not trying to lock us in for the next 7 weeks in this series into some sort of faith versus science debate. I think that happens a lot in our culture. And there's certainly a time and a place for some of those conversations, and they're enlightening conversations. But the older I get, the more I follow God in my life, I'm becoming more and more okay with mystery. You know what I'm talking about? The older I get, it seems like I'm more okay saying I don't know to certain answers to certain questions. Anybody else, like the older you get, you're like, the more I realize I have no idea about anything. Especially as a parent, that's how I feel quite often. And I'm okay with mystery. And I think often, the Christian and the scientist end up at odds. And I think that the Christian and the scientist, as a pastor, I have a lot in common with the science community. I think we're both all looking at this world with a sense of awe and wonder, and just taking it all in with our jaw on the floor. And I think the Christian and the scientist often are on the same page. And I don't want to lock us into some sort of faith versus science debate. And I think that argument in the modern world, in the post-scientific world, often misses the point of why we have these scriptures and what these scriptures are here to do for us as followers of Jesus and as followers of God. And often what we do is we read Genesis 1, this one in particular, and we're going to look at this passage together in a few moments, but we read it and we try to drag this ancient story of how God created the heavens and the earth into the modern world and try to jam it into our categories of creationism or evolution. And we miss the entire point of why this story got recorded and why God gave it to humanity. To begin with. And so I'm not interested in the next 7 weeks of trying to prove or disprove, the 7 days of creation, and was it 7 literal days? You notice in the scriptures in the New Testament, Jesus is never involved in those arguments. He's never sitting down with the Pharisees going, okay, we got to talk about, was it literal days or was it, that's never the arguments Jesus had. In fact, Jesus would have had knowledge, and this is what we're going to talk about for the next 7 weeks. Not the 7 days of creation, that certainly would have been in there, but it would have been the 7 ways of creation that would have captured the imagination of the Hebrew people. And this is what we're going to talk about for the next 7 weeks together, just in case you are wondering where we're going. The 7 ways of creation that in the Old Testament, the first 39 books of the Bible, there's actually 7 different accounts for how God created the world. There's Genesis 1. We're going to look at that in a few moments. There's Genesis 2. There's Job has a creation account. The psalmist has a beautiful, vibrant creation account. We're going to look at these over the next 7 weeks. In the Hurd family, we're going to have a creation story of our own somewhere in the middle of this summer of our little boy coming into the world. But Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Isaiah all have these vibrant, beautiful creation accounts. And we're going to look at these together over the next 7 weeks in a series we're going to call A Summer of Wonder. And the reason we're calling it this is because these accounts are given to us not for the purpose of solving the faith versus science riddle. These were given to us, and we're going to try to kind of read them in the world that they were written in. They were given to us for the purpose of inspiring wonder and awe in our heart for who God is and what God has done. These stories were given to us that we would lift our eyes out of sort of our mundane, moments of life and just take it all in with a sense of awe and wonder that all of creation is humming with reverence for God. And we can join in the songs of the ocean. We can join in the songs of the mountains, just crying out for who God is and what God has done. And it's given to us that it would open our eyes up to the God who is at the center of all things. So are you ready for a summer of wonder? Are you ready to roll? Let's dive into the book of Genesis together. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 1 together this morning, the very first creation account. If you don't have a Bible, you can follow along on the screens. Genesis chapter 1. This is how God is going to begin what is going to be a very long book. But he begins his story. He introduces himself to humanity this way. Genesis chapter 1 is where we'll begin, starting in verse 1. Amen. In the beginning, God. So at the center of it all, he wants you to know God. Right there, I'm already like, wow, that's amazing. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness. So the words that's used in the second sentence of the Bible is formless, empty, darkness, some chaos was erupting in the world, apparently, was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the water. So the world at this point is chaos, and God enters in, and he's going to speak order into the chaos of the world. This is what it looks like. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So this God has a creative ability to speak something into nothing, to speak order into chaos. He speaks light into existence. I could talk to a light switch all day, nothing's gonna happen. Let there be light. God speaks, and light burst forth. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. So God is speaking, he's separating the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning on this very first day. So this is the account that the Hebrew people would have received, that you and I in the 21st century have, of how God says, this is sort of what it looked like when God was there creating, fashioning, shaping, creatively speaking the expansive horizons of the world into existence. Now, in the modern world, we are fascinated with questions of material origins. I know you probably weren't having that discussion on your way to church this morning with your wife, but in the modern sort of big philosophical scientific world, we get fascinated with questions of material origins. How did all this come into existence? How did dirt get here? How did the sky get here? How did the oceans? Was it a big bang? How old is it? These are the questions that fascinate the scientific community. The education system is focused on these questions. What is the origin of the material world? In the ancient worldview, this was not the questions they were asking. They were not asking questions of material origin. They were asking questions of who's in charge of this place? Who runs the world? They would look up in the sky and they would see lightning, and they would have this sense there's a force out there somewhere bigger than us. They would look at hurricanes and say there must be some other force at work in the world. Apparently, we're not alone in this world. There's something other than us that is bigger than us. And their question was not of material origins. Their question in the ancient worldview was questions of who's in charge? Who's running this place called planet Earth? At the time this story began to circulate among the Hebrew people, Genesis 1 began to circulate, the Babylonians were the world's superpower. And the Babylonians were incredibly violent people. Even in just the ancient world, they were violent, even in ancient worldview standards, in terms of what they would do in warfare, how they would treat people, who they would kill. They'd kill family members for no real reason, just incredibly violent people. And the Babylonians had an elaborate system of gods and goddesses. They would look up in the sky and see a sun, and they would say, well, there must be some kind of a sun god, and there would be people that would worship the sun, the god of the sun. They had gods and goddesses for everything in the Babylonian world. They had a goddess of beer. Isn't that unbelievable? You can actually go back. Her name was Ninkasi, and there were elaborate songs written, long worship songs written to the goddess of beer. This all sounds strange, but some of you have neighbors that worship the sun and beer, okay? So it's not that odd. This was the ancient world, and the Babylonians were incredibly violent sort of people, and as they began to imagine the gods and goddesses, they recorded a creation account that was very violent. And there was a common story that they told in the ancient Mesopotamian Babylonian culture of how the world came into existence. It was called the Enuma Elish. Anybody remember this from literature? 4 of us, awesome. The Enuma Elish was as common as you would say George Washington was the first president or Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president. This was what they believed in the ancient world of how the world came into existence. A brief overview of the Enuma Elish, because I know you're fascinated. The Enuma Elish said that there was these 2 gods that were married. They were the gods of the ocean, Tiamat and Apsu. They were kind of a husband and wife combo of gods. Another god named Marduk rose up and went to war against Apsu and slayed and defeated the god Apsu. Well, Tiamat was very upset by this, and Tiamat went to war. The female goddess Tiamat went to war against Marduk, and Marduk slayed Tiamat, and the Enuma Elish, the popular creation myth of the day, said that the earth was fashioned out of the carcass of the goddess Tiamat. And people didn't question this. That was just sort of course. George Washington's the first president. We're standing on Tiamat right now. That was just commonplace and common belief. And the Babylonians were very violent people, and they created the gods in their image. The Hebrew people, their poets, their priests, their prophets, God meets them. And they're an obscure group of people on the Mediterranean seaboard. And their creation story is very subversive in the ancient world because it begins this way. In the beginning, God. Just 4 words in, your jaw would be on the floor. Like, wait a minute, there's not gods and goddesses out there at war? No, in the beginning, God created, not out of violence, but out of creativity. The oceans, the horizons, the birds, the stars, people, he created all this out of love, joy, and creativity. This is who God introduces himself to the Hebrew people this way. I am God and I have no equals. I am God who holds all things together, and I don't just have dominion over the sun or over some stars. I have dominion over all things, and I have created the world not out of violence, but out of creativity. This is the story that the Hebrew people were handed from God of who God is and how he created the world. And this would inspire awe and wonder for who your God is. The stories that we believe, whether you believe the creation account is true or not, the stories that we believe about how we ended up in the world, they shape us. The stories we tell ourselves are incredibly powerful. The Babylonians were incredibly violent people because they believed in incredibly violent gods. The Hebrew people, our ancestors, as Christians, we believe we are to exist in the world as creative people, as loving people, as joyous people, because we believe at the center of the world, the engine of the world is a God who speaks out of creativity and joy and love, a creation and a world into existence. The stories we tell ourselves are incredibly powerful. Let me ask you a question. In a world of increasing violence, in a world of increasing chaos, in a world where every time you turn on the news politically, as we head into a summer of political chaos, of Americans being at each other's throats over political, economic, social issues, in a world where every time you turn on the news, there's more reason for anxiety. Istanbul, Orlando, you just sort of pick, just constant. In a world of increasing chaos, might Genesis 1 be as relevant as ever? To remind ourselves that the engine of the world, the God who sits at the center of all things, is the God who can bring order into chaos. Might this story be as relevant as it's ever been? Might this story have some ancient, brilliant truth in it, even though it was not written down in a post-scientific world? Might this story that God has given to humanity be as relevant as it's ever been? Maybe in your life, you sat with a friend in a coffee shop in the past week or so, and you talk through your anxiety, your chaos, and you said maybe relationally, in your marriage, maybe with friendships, it's just chaos. Maybe financially, you were telling somebody recently, it's just chaos. Maybe physically, it's just chaos. Might this story be as relevant as ever? That the God at the center of all things is the God who can bring order into your chaos. Might it be the best time to stop and remind ourselves that we serve a God who introduced himself to humanity this way? I am God and I have no equals. And I can bring order into chaos. And I have created the world. I didn't bring chaos into chaos. I didn't bring violence into chaos. I bring order into chaos. Now, I know for some of us, you go, wait a minute, that doesn't make the story true. And we sort of need to get back to the categories of creationism or evolution, and we need to sort of figure out, is it intelligent design? And I certainly understand there's a time and a place for those discussions. But to ask those questions of this ancient story is a bit like asking how fast the color blue is. The categories just do not apply. This story was not written down in a worldview or in a world where they had understanding of atomic particles or DNA or nucleus. They lived in a world where people literally believed the earth was the dead carcass of a Greek or of a Babylonian goddess. This is the world. And to ask these kinds of questions causes us to miss the point of the story. It was written to give a sense of awe and wonder for a God who can bring order into chaos. In fact, when you read the story in the Hebrew language, there's a poetic, lyrical sort of nature to it. God is speaking creation into existence. This is how he's telling the story. In the first 3 days of creation, he's separating light from darkness, earth from the sea. He's dividing things. The next 3 days, he's filling that which he's created with people, with birds, with animals. He's separating and he's creating. And there's this rhythmic sort of poetic tone to it where he keeps saying, it is good, it is good, it is good. This is how God has chosen to tell the story. If I were to ask you to tell me your love story of how you and your wife met, or you and your boyfriend, girl, whatever it is, and I said, well, tell me the story. How did you meet? You would tell me, you could tell the story a lot of different ways, couldn't you? You could tell the story using very technical language. You could say, well, tell me the story, Jim. Well, 20 years ago, I was in this bar, and I noticed this blonde-headed woman named Sandra, and my optical nerve noticed her, and it uploaded a message to my brain, and that fired some synapses, which uploaded some serotonin and uploaded some dopamine, and I walked over to her, and I formed a sentence with a predicate and a subject. You could tell the story that way. To which I would say, Jim, you're very odd. No, instead, you would choose to tell the best, beautiful stories of your life in different language. You would say something along the lines of this. Man, I was in this bar 20 years ago, and I noticed this girl, and we started talking, and it was like I found my other half. I wouldn't go, Jim, you are a liar. Do you mean to imply you used to be half of an individual? The whole thing is not true. No, you would understand there is a way that you tell beautiful stories. God meets the Hebrew people and says, I am God, I have no equals. Here's how I created the world. He tells the story using this beautiful language, this rhythmic, poetic, lyrical nature to how he tells the story. This was essentially recorded as worship material in the ancient world. The Hebrew people would gather probably every day. They would gather at night and they would recite this to one another. In the beginning, our God's the God who can bring order into chaos. We had a tough day today out in the fields. Our crops didn't produce harvest. We don't have food to eat. It's just chaos out there. But we stop and we remember this evening that our God brings order into chaos. It's been a tough day. We got attacked by another tribe, but our God's the God that even in chaos, he can bring order into chaos. Nobody in the ancient world would have stopped and go, wait a minute, was it 6 literal days? That would have missed the point because this was to inspire awe and wonder in the audience that heard it. And it's written down to inspire awe and wonder for you and for me. I imagine the part that you would wait for in the ancient world, that our ancestors would sit and just wait for this part of this to be recited, was the very ending of this creation account. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, the story concludes this way, where God says this, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, so God created mankind in his own image. Right there, your eyes would get as big as frisbees. Your jaw would hit the floor because this isn't just a story about how unbelievable God is. This is now a story about how unbelievable people are. We are made in the image of God. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he creates them. God blesses them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. You're blessed. Fill the earth and subdue it. This isn't just a story about who God is. This is now a story about who people are. I think God knew that every human being would fundamentally struggle with purpose. What are we doing down here in the world? And God puts at the very beginning of his story, at the very beginning of his book, this message: you are here as image bearers. You have a divine purpose, a divine appointment in this world. God essentially, they would have read the story this way, that you and I are in this world as image bearers of God. We essentially bear the very image of God in our soul and in our heart. That they would read this story and they would say, wow, when God looks at us, he's looking back at himself. And God's the God who can bring order into chaos. And he looks down at us as human beings and he sees people that he created and fashioned in his image that have the ability to go into the world reflecting God, bringing order into chaos everywhere we go. And that's the purpose of life, to go through life as the image bearer of God, creating in a world where there's chaos, bringing order into it. And we don't discover our purpose. We don't discover what life's about until we understand that we're here to be like angled mirrors of God, going throughout the world where there's hurting, broken people, where there's pain, where there's dysfunction, where people want to give up, and reminding them, bringing order into the chaos of our world. Most people never figure this out, do they? In fact, most people go through life like this, just thinking life's all about them. It's all about me, Jared. I don't know why I'm so miserable. I don't know why life's not working for me. It's not until we figure out we're put here for a purpose, to reflect back to God and to reflect to creation, this God who brings order into chaos. That's worship. Our life is worship, just going through the world, reflecting the nature of God everywhere we go. The psalmist is reflecting on this truth, and the psalmist said it this way. I love this. This is David in Psalm chapter 8, verse 3. We'll put it on the screen in case it takes you a while to get there. It says this: when I consider your heavens, he's just reflecting on Genesis 1. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them, I love this, a little lower, talking about people, you have made them a little lower than the angels and crown them with glory and honor. Isn't that powerful? That's who you are. It's what God says about you. It's what God says about me. You're made a little lower than the angels. Put that on your LinkedIn profile. Well, what do you do? Well, I'm a little lower than the angels. Thanks for asking. It's a powerful word that's spoken over creation, and it's a powerful word spoken over your humanity and mine. You're here, a little lower than the angels, reflecting the nature of God. Go bring a world in chaos back into order. That is your purpose in this world, wherever your feet go. I love Albert Einstein said it this way. He said it this way in this quote. He said, the eternal mystery of the world is its comprehensibility. The simple fact that we have the intellect and skills to inquire and test and make scientific discoveries is remarkable, but with a rational, all-powerful God in whose image we are made, it is no surprise that we are able and eager to make scientific sense of the world around us. To which I imagine his friends replied, thanks, Einstein. Just this unbelievable capacity that exists inside of you and me. He's saying it's because we're made in the image of God. Even a scientist who's trying to disprove God through ration and through science, it's because we have this image of God to order things inside of our spirit and soul. So for our tribe, you go, what do I do with that this week? Man, that's kind of big thought. I'm telling you, whenever you go into the world to somebody or somewhere and you begin to try to bring order into the chaos of the world, it will fill your heart with wonder, because that's what you're made to do. And if you go to somebody this week, maybe you have a friend who's even said recently, I'm just barely hanging on. And you try to bring order into their chaos. You speak the loving word. You're generous to them, if it's a financial, whatever it is. And you say, God, I want to help. And you speak a loving word to them in their pain. You're bringing order into their chaos. If you walk into your office on Tuesday morning and the shipping department in Belgrade didn't get the parts they needed to the office in Dallas, and now there's chaos in the office in San Diego, and your whole team's freaking out. Maybe we're gonna lose the account, and you walk in and you speak into the chaos. We're gonna do what we can. We're gonna try to figure this out. and you bring some order of peace and calm into the anxiety and chaos, man, you're like the God of Qualcomm in that moment, reflecting the nature of God everywhere you go. I was sitting on a plane a few weeks ago next to this guy, and he's like, man, he's like, what do you do for a living? And that's always a conversation killer. He's like, enjoy this 3-hour flight. So I'm a pastor, and he's like, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I'm like, yeah, I've heard that before. And I said, well, tell me what you do. He's like, man, I have this passion to renovate homes. He goes, it started as a hobby, but it's kind of grown into this business. And I take homes that I've just, dilapidated, and I fix them up. And this is my new business. I love to do it. And I'm thinking, so you go through the world bringing order into chaos. Of course you do. You're made in the image of God, whether you recognize it or not. It's in our souls. And we're made to go into the world, bringing order into chaos. And it fills our eyes with wonder for us and for God when we fulfill our purpose. Brad is going to lead us in a song, but let's lift our eyes to the creator of all things this morning.